But the origin behind this absolutely insane auction, and I think it's what 2 weeks left to go, right, before extended bidding starts. I think that's. So you were saying, obviously, when you first joined Goldin, there was kind of like a vault aspect that you guys have been keeping, and you were going to crack open the vault, and you didn't overplay it. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that, how that all came together, because this is an insane auction.
Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, Sean and I had a conversation. Sean Goodrich is now currently head of comic client partnerships for Goldin. And even though I'm wearing a campy Spider-Man t-shirt, I'm head of comic book strategy for Goldin. I just can't find the t-shirt to prove it today. But you can look me up on the website. I promise I am employed by Goldin. So about 5 years ago, it occurred to me that we were living the dream, right? So we got to the point where our comic book business was past the how do you put this, the life expectancy of a garden slug or something, like whenever every 5 minutes you're like, well, we got this great collection, but we can't afford to buy it. Well, we'd gone past that point. We got to the point where a lot of comic book dealers almost never get to, which is when you have enough stuff in the pipeline to pay for the new stuff that comes in the door. And so the big paydays tended to be, wow, we've just got this collection of Silver Age books, and we have all the big number ones: Avengers 1, X-Men 1, Spider-Man 1, maybe an AF-15, maybe an FF1 sometimes, maybe a Journey 83 sometimes, maybe a Hulk one. But those are the rarer books, those earlier ones. And yeah, so we'd sell it all, and then we'd get a big check. And we're like, okay, so I guess see you next month. Like it became. One day I realized I don't know how long we've got doing this, and it turned out quite a long time actually. But at the time, I didn't know that, and we didn't know if this was going to happen forever or it could end next week or whatever. We didn't know. And so I said to Sean, yeah, maybe we should keep some of this stuff, like the special books that we get from collections. They've more than paid for themselves. The collection, we've sold off the rest of it. Let's keep some of the keys and create effectively a 401k of comic books and just put them in I don't know. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't know. I sort of visualize like one of those old time bank vaults with the big wheel on the door, and you spin the wheel and this giant door swings open. It's 3 feet thick, and there's all this stuff in there. And in the films it's usually gold bars and cash and everything. But wouldn't it be cool if we had a comic book bank vault? And that's also our retirement fund. And so gradually, bit by bit, we put books into the vault. And then Goldin approached us to acquire us, and so part of the deal was we'll sell our vault at Goldin. Now, I'd love to tell you that every book in that elite auction belonged to Sean and I, but it's totally not true. Some of them definitely. Yeah. Some of them are consignments that we've got since we joined, and I'm particularly excited about some of the Golden Age books in there because we didn't get many big Golden Age books. I think we have a Superman 1. We have we had an All American 16, but low grade. I mean, pretty low grade. There's some really nice Golden Age books in this elite auction, so I'm really excited about those. There's a Cap 1.
Yeah,
I didn't. Yeah. You saw that one. It's currently a really nice Cap 1. It's 3.0.
That's great.
It's exactly the kind of grade you want for a book like that, because in some kind of fantasy world where you've won a small lottery, not the big one, but like you won like 5 numbers plus the bonus or something, and you've got 250 grand or something. I don't know how much it's going to sell for, but let's say it's not so far out of reach that somebody with a bit of money couldn't dream about it. If you got a Cap 1 that's like a 9.0 or something, like you're talking millions of dollars, and that's a very exclusive club. But when you see a Cap 1 that's a 3.0, and it's a very nice 3.0 too, by the way, you're like, how many kidneys do I actually need to function on a day-to-day basis? Maybe I could sell one of them and I could buy that Cap 1, and I'd be very happy. I'd be happy. I'd drink less alcohol. So that book is so exciting to see. It's such a classic cover. The colors are really nice too. And it's only a 3, but it's a really nicely presenting 3.
Yeah.
What else is in there? We got a couple of pre-Robin detectives in there as well.
Yeah, there's like the one with his origin, and another one in a very good grade for something of that age too, which I actually got to be honest. So I'm looking at one of them, 33, which is, obviously Joe Chill, Thomas and Martha. Uh, it's a 4 or 5, which for that age is absolutely bonkers. I mean, another piece of history. You talk about Cap One. That's really cool too. I honestly have never seen that one. I mean, again, I admittedly I'm a big Batman fan. I just got a page from Batman 1, and I was just excited just to get that, like a page, because it features the Joker, and I was like, this is his first appearance. It's cool. But to have, again, there's so many iconic detectives and early Batmans. I've never even seen this cover. So I was scrolling through and I'm like, wait, Batman's origin is told in 33? I'm like, oh my Lord, it's just so cool. So
Yeah, I think it's the expanded origin. I don't know if in Batman, sorry, Detective 27, there's some allusion made to it, but for sure it's the first time his origin is told in detail. And it's got that classic cover of him jumping off a bridge onto some bad guys who happen to be in a boat for some reason. But it's just really cool. It's really, I think maybe they're in a car. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Are they driving under a road bridge? Anyway, he's jumping off a
we'll do a
bridge.
superimpose when we edited this. It looks like it's a car
Yeah,
under a bridge. Yeah.
if you're Batman, you don't want to just like walk onto the scene and bust the bad guys. You got to jump onto the scene. Like you got to jump down. And I just think it has so much energy, that cover, and I just love those early Batman appearances. We came this close to having a Detective 29 actually twice. Once when a guy wrote to me to say I'm a farmer and I was sorting out the old barn. I mean, you couldn't make this up. I was sorting out the old barn and I came across a safe. and
Oh, don't tell me that.
and he gets at least he got a locksmith to come and open it for him. He didn't try and like torch it open or something, like to keep it like in the 1930s 40s safe cracking cliche. He didn't try and torch it open at least and set fire to everything. So he opened it properly, and the inside were I think about 60 or 70 Golden Age books, the earliest of which was Detective 29.
Oh,
And I remember saying to him, "You don't know what you've got here, do you?" He said, "No. What is it?" They're like, "Oh, it's the second time Batman was on a cover, dude. It's just
oh my
anyway."
God.
And then fast forward years later, because we couldn't afford that at the time, we actually had some money, and we we're like, "There's one for sale. I want to own this book. I think it's a classic. It's Batman swinging in through the window, smashing the glass everywhere, and there's a guy with a hypodermic about to inject somebody in it.
Yeah.
Super cool cover." And we didn't get that one. We got outbid. So we never own those, but this will be my next choice. There's also Detective 31, which is a classic cover with Batman's head like a mountain with mist around it. That is super expensive. But for
Yeah.
some reason, Detective 33, although it's a very important issue, and okay, I should preface this by saying everything's expensive at this level of the hobby. I'm not trying to suggest that anyone could afford it, but relatively, like if you had two books the same grade, one was Detective 31 with that classic cover, and Detective 33 with the origin story, I think it's about 50% the price. Like the number
Yeah.
31 is double the price. For what? Because it's a nice cover. I don't really get that. This to me feels more historically important because it's Batman's origin. And I don't really think you have to sell a kidney to afford this one. It's certainly an upper echelon book. I'm not doubting that. In the grade, it's probably I don't know. Look, I think the last sale was somewhere in the upper 60s, which is crazy because you can buy a really nice car for that money. That's going to depreciate, and one day it's going to end up in a scrapyard. Whereas this is something that's going to be an appreciating asset for sure. I think it's a beautiful book.
Oh. And then you mentioned obviously that Superman one. Point 5.
Yeah,
I don't think it matters honestly the grade. I mean, it's Superman 1. So and those are I think especially hot right now, and it's just a cool it is a really I mean the cover is just beyond iconic.
that is a really special copy. That's actually not the copy that Sean and I own. This is another Superman one. That is a really special copy, and it doesn't sound like it when you first hear what I'm going to say. It sounds weird. And it is. So whoever owned this book, it was mostly coverless. There were elements of the cover available.
Mm.
So what they did, don't even ask me how or why, was they got a color copy of the original cover, attached it to the book, and then glued on original pieces of the original cover onto the color copy. So I believe it's the figure of Superman and the logo are original, and everything else is a color copy. And the weirdest part about this is CGC gave this a universal 0.5. It's such a strange decision. I mean, if you look at the notes on the label, like, oh, that's different, but it's so cool because
Wow.
it's not coverless. There are elements of the cover there. It's somehow more special than if you had the original cover that was falling apart and like barely attached or something. Like, yeah, this is really interesting. The somebody paid, I think it was $11,000 for the A from an original Action One cover.
Yeah. Graded, right?
CGC put that in a holder and identified it as an original piece of an Action One cover, and someone paid $11,000 for that. Now, what you said, well, you bought the page from Batman One where it shows the Joker. Like, that's been an established practice for some time. People buying single pages from iconic key issues, but I've never heard of somebody buying a tiny fraction of the cover of an iconic key issue in what it's an attempt to over time build an entire cover by buying pieces of it. It's so weird. It's like fractional ownership in the real world, which is so crazy. But going back to this book, I would rather own this copy of Superman 1 with its two original pieces on a cover than one that just had a ratty cover that was falling apart. And you sometimes see those.
Yeah.
You sometimes see huge key issues. One of the other ones is when they're brittle pages. And you sometimes see the holder has pieces of flakes of the pages inside the holder where it's moved around over the years. And I can't stand that personally. I don't like brittle books. So I actually think this is a really cool way to own a Superman 1. And it actually looks nice. Okay, it's only a 0.5, but it looks so nice.
Yeah. And like you said, I've never seen a label like that too. So it's not conserved, it's not restored, it's a universal label. And it says, and I was looking as you were talking, and I was like magnifying the label, and it's like has pieces of the logo. I mean, it's super unique. And then again, if you're looking for pieces of history and you're not looking for a specific, like, oh, I need like you said, a 7 or 8 of this or whatever. If you're just looking for a piece of history and you're a big fan, that really is an affordable way to go. I mean, obviously not affordable. It's a 15 grand with 2 weeks to go. So it's going to go higher. But if you have like a certain amount allotted and you're like, this is, I'm never going to spend 300 grand for, a Superman 1 or whatever it is, in a 1 or a 2 or whatever it could be. That's the way to go, really.
Yeah, it's something different. I'm fascinated to see what it sells for. But yes, if anyone watching this aspires to own a Superman 1 and they don't care what shape it's in, given that it's a 0.5, this is probably one of the most special 0.5s there is. And you're right, I have never seen another example of a CGC label that looks like that. CGC are well known to do some strange stuff. For example, most Golden Age books can have a very, very small amount of color touch on the cover and still be universal.
Wow.
They can also have glue on the spine and still be universal. And I'm not sure who came up with this idea. Like, someone said, well, because they're really old, we'll let them off or something. I don't get it. So like, restoration is restoration. If it's present, it's present. If it's not, it's not. I don't understand the distinction, but whatever. Like, CGC make their own rules. You talk about iconic covers. There's an Action 7 as well, I think, in this sale. That's 1.8.
Yes.
I'm just going to double check. I think I've seen.
I was eyeing that one. Yeah, I'm scrolling through because there's so many amazing ones, and I'm going through, and that's not the first Lex Luthor, right? That's Action, or that's
Action 23 is the first Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
But I think this book is what people call the poor man's Action 1, but it's the second Superman cover of all time. because Action 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are historically incredible and very important books, do not have Superman on the cover. So this is the second Superman cover.
Wow.
And again, it's yeah, it's a 1.8. There is some staining. I think the top staple bled some rust into the cover a little bit. That happens with these books when they get wet. But it's the colors are really sharp on this. This is you often see a 1.8 this sort of grade. Sometimes there are pieces like have been removed, or there's just significant damage to the main image on the front cover.
Yeah.
So, all 1.8s are not created equal, especially if you look at a book like this. You don't see this book very often, but you see a book like Amazing Fantasy 15, those things change hands constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to see a whole bunch of different examples of the same grade. And there are some really horrendous looking 1.8s out there.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, I'm trying to think of with AF-15 specifically, there was I don't know if you guys had it, because I know you guys had it was the Color Touch cover that broke the record for that grade in
That's right, that was us,
Color
yeah.
Touch. And there was another one that I saw recently, and it went way above estimated because it had no chipping. And so people forget about, the 60s, and then of course, the 40s, throw that in there, the condition and the quality of the paper that they made and the chipping. And it was, I think, a 4 or 5, but it had absolutely no, it was pristine. Like that, if you zoomed in, there was no pieces missing. And so it went way above what a 4 or 5 in that would go for, because again, someone's like, wait, this is a gorgeous copy of AF-15. Maybe it could get higher, but at the same time, like you said, even if it stays the same grade, it is super unique to that time period, because there's always the Marvel chipping is so prevalent. And I'm actually looking at the AF-15 that you guys have, and I don't see a lot of chipping on it with the 4.0. I was gonna like bite my words, but then I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, this one's pretty clean as well. So again, this is a 4 that's not all 4s are created equal. I've seen 4 5s, I've seen 5 5s with large pieces of the cover on the side missing, which is nuts. And so I'd rather have a 4.0 that is completely intact than a 5.5 with like a chunk missing on the side. Like what, like the consistency of the grading, it makes no sense sometimes.
Well, the interesting thing is when you get to sort of elite level collecting, because we're talking about this is an elite auction, but typically when people talk about elite, they're talking about a value. But to me, elite is something different. It feels like aspirational, yes, but also when you're an elite level collector, you're discerning. You don't just go, oh, I want an AF-15 and I want a 4.0, I'll just buy one. Those kind of people, they just take their time and they say there'll be another one along. Even AF-15, it's a rare book-ish, but it's not that rare. It's not so rare that you will not see other 4.0s and have a choice. There's a choice. Well, for me, an advanced collector will say, I don't care what the back looks like, really. Like, if I can afford a certain grade, I'll look for a book that has damage on the back, staining, pieces missing, tears, whatever it is, because the front cover will be proportionately much nicer. Because if it's a 4.0, there's some serious problems with a 4.0, no question. Maybe they're internal. Maybe there's some inner pages with tears. Maybe there's a big stain on the back. I had a beautiful Brave and the Bold 28 that had a giant stain on the back. It was a 5.0. It looked like a 9.0. It just looked lovely from the front. And I'm just like, I'd rather have a 4.0 that the front looks really great and the back is all the damage than a 4.0, which is, like the corner's cut off and the stains on the front and then there's Marvel chipping, and that's what I talk about elite collectors. And so when we put our books in an elite auction, we don't necessarily go on value. We're trying to present something that is slightly above average, that an elite collector will appreciate and own and enjoy, because it's a slightly better example of that book, if possible. I mean, some of them, they're just so rare that you just have to sell what you can get.
Another one that I always think is Spider-Man 50. I know, and there's more out there of it, but it's talk about a first Kingpin. The cover is about as much of a piece of artwork that you can think of, especially for the time, and will never ever go out of style. And
Mhm.
it's another book that's drastically undervalued. Avengers 1, I still think is pretty undervalued. And so there's just so many that, like you said, like I think collectors know the importance of the book, what it means, and it's not just about, I mean, value is always going to factor in, but it's not just about value, it's about significance and that kind of a level, which is I love.
There's something I like about the red covered books.
Oh,
I think black cover books are always hard to find in high grade because black is the worst possible cover color. I mean, any damage is going to be obvious. But when you mentioned Amazing Spider-Man 50, it's interesting that book does not have Kingpin on the cover. He doesn't appear on the cover till 51. But there is something about that cherry red cover with Spider-Man kind of I quit, walking
yeah.
away. There's something about that cover, like there's quite a long run of history of books that do not have the first appearance of the character with the character on the cover. Like even Wonder Woman, her first appearance in All
Yeah.
Star 8, she's not on the cover, which is weird. But it's such a valuable book because it's the first Wonder Woman. And it's again the same thing here. I think Kingpin being on the cover would make this a double whammy. Then Silver Surfer doesn't appear on the cover of FF48 either. That's Marvel didn't look ahead and go, well, this is going to be a really important book one day. We better put the reason why it's going to be important on the book. No one knew. They were just creating great stories and great art, and it just happened to be the way that collectors decided that something's worth a lot. I think that Amazing Spider-Man 50 is probably one of the best Silver Age books. I think probably I prefer Amazing Spider-Man 14, the first
Yeah.
appearance of Green Goblin, because Green Goblin is just probably the ultimate Spider-Man villain, I think. Sorry, I like the mixture of him being crazy and the technology, and it's just something about that.
I was gonna say, because that's a book, man, I remember when that's one that you were talking about up and down, right? With like Iron Man 55 and Thanos. That's one that I feel like, and I'm not just saying this as we're talking, now is the time to get that book. I remember I picked up one shortly after No Way Home, and that was a big mistake. But I'm gonna hold on to it. It's signed by Stan Lee. It's like something I'll keep in my collection forever. Like I'm never gonna unload that. But prices have gone down, and if someone like is looking to get it, again, I see there's you guys have a few. There's a 5.5. There is an 8.5. My lord. So yeah, I mean this is the time, because it's going to be a really much better deal than it was when No Way Home was coming out. And then there's also a new movie that's going to come out in a couple of years, and that one's going to go straight up again. And I've looked at the historical like up and down. That one's the one that like you said is never going to, it's never going to be not a key book. And I definitely truly think like now is the time to get that book, because it's in recent history it's never been a better time.
If I were Marvel, I'd be doing something similar to what they did with Venom and the Carnage. That the way that they blended those two universes, and I would do the same thing with the Goblin and the Hobgoblin. I think that Amazing Spider-Man 238 is an insanely hard book to find in 9.8. Although if you look in the census, there are
Yeah.
100 or two. There are lots of them. It's not like they're so rare, but they are particularly hard to find in 9.8 because they have an insert, which means if you press them,
The
you
tattoos.
press an outline of the tattoo onto the cover and you don't get a 9.8, you get 9.6.
uh,
And I can't tell you how many 9.6s we've had over the years. And we were like, this book is impossible to get in a 9.8. And then we got one. And I said to Sean, we're keeping that. I don't know what
yeah.
it's worth. I don't really care. That's going in the vault. And one day, we'll list that for sale. But the reason I mentioned that is because I think that the first appearance of the Green Goblin is going to be, you have to start there. If you were going to do a reboot of that, you'd have to start with the original and then introduce the Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
And so I think that Amazing Spider-Man 14's got a big future. I still do. I actually think 15 is a really good book too. Craven is, he's a no-brainer to do a series,
Yeah.
or a movie. So I've been hot on ASM 15 for quite some time. But we haven't even talked about Fantastic Four #1.
And
And I
5.
think that book is, well, okay, well, we could talk about #5, but I have a personal connection to #1, given that during the early days of the pandemic, I just said to myself, I'm buying myself an FF1. I've wanted to forever, and I don't know how long the world's going to be around. The world might be ending. I'm going to own an FF1. So I bought myself an FF1, and then a year later, I went, wow, it's gone up a lot of money. I'm going to sell it. So I sold it, which is crazy because it meant a lot to me, and I don't know why I sold it, and I feel that I sold out. And the prices kept going up and kept going up, and suddenly last year they came back down.
Mm-hmm.
And you're now looking at FF1, and the movie's still a couple of years out.
Yeah. Yeah, you got time.
And I think it's 2024 or 20. I think it might even be 25. It's a way off. So it's not like the movies come and the spikes happen, it's crashing back down because it's post-movie blues. No, the movie's way, way, way off. And so FF1 corrected way too hard, too fast. And I now think it's a buying opportunity again. So I'm actually thinking of buying myself another one, which I'm going to keep this time. I promise. I promise I'm going to keep this one. We have a selection of them in this. It's kind of weird to have more than one in an auction. It's really awesome. I think the nicest is a 7.0, which is like, whoa, I don't see that very often.
Insane. A 7.0. It's another one of like, it's almost like an AF-15 in the sense that that era is impossible to get. The 7.5 actually impossible to get that kind of a grade and that kind of a book. It's nuts.
Undersold our FF1. Sorry. Yeah, and if you can't afford the 7.5, there are others too. But yeah, it is impossible. The funny thing about the Marvel Silver Age keys is how rarely you see the first few. So FF1, Hulk 1, Journey 83. I would say those three are the hardest to come by. I don't count Tales to Astonish 27 because although technically it's the first appearance of Ant-Man, it's not really Ant-Man. I mean, he's not a hero. He's not in costume. It's more of a horror story.
Yeah.
So I think Tales of Suspense 39, Avengers 1, Daredevil 1, I'm trying to think, X-Men 1, ASM 1, obviously AF-15. We see AF-15 more often than we see Journey 83.
Yeah.
Just talking in general terms, over the last 10, 12 years that Sean and I have been doing this, Journey 83 is the least common of those. And then Hulk 1. Hulk 1 is also very uncommon. And then FF1.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, also and I guess one of the last ones you can go, 4 copies of Fantastic Four 5. Another book that seems to be, like a lower count because that they're, it's first Doctor Doom, which obviously is one of the all-time great villains. But at the same time, much like Hulk, like you were saying, Journey 83 and Hulk 1, the prices are higher than some that are comparable. And so that's another book that seems to be really hard to find in a high grade. And then you guys have 4, one that's signed by Stan Lee, which is, again, that's really cool. You don't see all the time as well. And if you do, they're insanely expensive. With another really cool cover too. He's on the cover. It's iconic. It's super interesting. I actually have both FF1 and FF5, and I think FF5 is a little cooler, the cover wise, because FF1 is just Mole Man, right? So he's or not Mole Man, it's the monster that Mole Man's controlling. So it's cool, but I love the Doom cover because it's super interesting and unique, and it's just like one of these wacky 60s styles covers that kind of makes no sense, but kind of does. So that's insane to have 4 copies, and I don't think I've ever seen that in one auction before either.
It's interesting, that book. It's a little bit like, I'm trying to think of an example. Avengers 4 is usually missing from the run of Avengers. You see runs of Avengers with 1 and 2 and 3 and 5 and 6, and the 4 is missing. But it's more likely that we'll see an FF1 in a collection than FF5. And I don't know why. I guess it's because Doom is, if you read the story, Stan Lee was just beginning to find his feet with the FF. The first few issues, there's all kinds of confusion. They don't have costumes at first, and we're not too sure about their backgrounds, and we're just establishing their characters. And Doctor Doom is suddenly like the first big knock it out of the park issue of FF. So I like to think that the reason it's so scarce and it doesn't show up in collections, it literally got read till it fell apart.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to think that. Or there was just some kid in the neighborhood who knew that this was going to be the one to have and just traded all of everyone's FF5s. And he's sitting on, he's probably like 80 years old now, and he's sitting on a stack of 5,000 of them in his basement or something. If you know of that person, please put them in touch.
Yeah.
We'd love to talk.
So to close things out, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you're particularly excited about? I mean, obviously there's so many, but it's just so many cool things here.
There are a few though. I'd like to just we don't have to get into too much detail on each one, but there's the Patsy Walker #1 in an 8.0, which is from 1945. It's an all black cover, and it's a really goofy cover where she's on roller skates and she's fallen on her butt, and you know it's kind of like one of those borderline sexy / glamorous covers from the 1940s that were very acceptable back then. And I just find that so cool that we have that, because it's so hard to find in any kind of shape. Now, you don't see them in 2.0, let alone 8.0. This is so nice. So Matt Baker was an African-American artist who was most famous for drawing human females. Like, he was really talented at drawing pretty women. And so he worked in the late 40s and up to I think the mid 50s, mostly for St. John Publishing.
Okay.
And his covers are highly sought after. There are collectors who just buy Matt Baker covers. So he did Phantom Lady 17, for example, which is a very famous, what the industry calls headlights covers, which, you know, I'm not going to go into the reasons why they call them headlights covers. You can Google it. But it's a very famous image of a beautiful woman. And we have a book called Seven Seas #4. And this is like a mermaid kind of character who's underwater. She's fighting a fish. It's just a weird color, but it's so gorgeous. The way her hair is floating in the water and all the bubbles. And it's just an unexpectedly beautiful cover. Sometimes people talk about classic covers, and they're classic because they're gory, or they're very overtly sexual in nature, and lots of curves and low cut dresses and stuff like that. But this is a classic cover because it's just beautiful. Yeah. I mean, another thing, we have a 9.8 of Silver Surfer #4 cover. That's the other kind of classic cover where you have two big heroes fighting each other, and that's considered a classic cover. But a 9.8 of any of those square bound Marvel books, like all the annuals, have to get a 9.8. They have to be absolutely perfect. And this one is, I mean, it's a tough book to. It's mostly a black cover. I mean, that for me is one of the standout books in the auction. It's just insane to see one of those at 9.8. Is two more books. I did earlier say that elite books would not feature modern. Elite auctions would not feature modern books very often because they're not all that special. And there are two really special modern books here. So the first is Venom: Lethal Protector #1 with the missing red foil on the cover, so it's all black.
Yeah.
And this is how CGC are not consistent about errors. So here we have a Venom #1 Lethal Protector with the error cover with a blue universal label. If you find a Spawn #1 with the missing ink, so the black ink is missing on the #1, it's a green label. Don't ask me why. That's just the way they did it. That's one to watch. The other one is we have the variant cover of Edge of Spider-Verse 2, and it's signed. Like, this blows my mind that we have this book. This book is the first variant cover that really broke out in value. Gwen Stacy as Spider-Woman. I mean, that's so cool. Yeah, it just doesn't get cooler than this. And I'm not really a guy that likes modern books very much, but this one I make an exception for. So I think that's one to watch.
Yeah, the Greg Land variant that's a hot book right now as well. That's I've seen that go for insane prices, and it's just nuts. Yes, and signed by Stan Lee too, because I mean, what is it? Signed in the book came out 2014, so you only had a couple of years to get it signed by Stan. It wasn't, it's hard that those newer books. You don't see that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to say that I'm so proud. This is our first, Sean and I, our first elite auction that we've been completely responsible for, and yeah, it's turned out really well. So I hope your audience enjoys looking at these cool books, and I hope maybe some of them bid on them.